Last year, we brought you Route 66. This year, we're touring another historic road, the Columbia River Highway, and we're starting right here in Troutdale, Oregon. The Columbia River Highway was built between 1914 and 1916, and it wasn't really built for commerce or anything like that. It was really built as a scenic road, and the intent was to keep the nature as undisturbed as possible. So that's going to make for this to be a little bit interesting. Now, not all of the old highway between Troutdale and the Dalles is still accessible to vehicle traffic, but we are going to drive as much of it as we possibly can and see all the historic sites along the way. The highway opened right around the time the Model T had made automobile travel accessible to the general public. As I alluded to in the opening, the highway was not about commerce or for getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible. This was the first planned scenic roadway in the United States, where the intent was to make the natural beauty accessible to the automobile traveler and to work with nature rather than blasting right through it. So, with a little bit of the background of the highway established, let's actually get out on the road and take a look at what it looks like today. As we cross this little bridge here over Beaver Creek, our first undiscovered gem is coming up on the right-hand side, and that is the Sugarpine Drive-In. While today the Sugarpine is a popular stop for ice cream, the building was originally a service station dating back to the 1920s. This photo shows it in 1923 when it was known as Cook's Garage. It's clear to see its location at mile 0 of the Columbia River Highway meant it was ideally located for serving people setting out on their motoring adventures. Just past the Sugarpine, we come to the Troutdale Bridge. Construction of the bridge started in 1912, and you can tell it's not very wide compared to the standards of today's vehicles, but at least I didn't hit this cop car as he went by. The bridge over the Sandy has been a very popular recreational spot for generations of travelers, as seen in the photo here taken circa 1920. Still on the section of highway running along the Sandy River, we come across Tad's Chicken and Dumplings. Tad Johnson was a local fisherman and opened his first roadhouse at the east end of the Troutdale Bridge in the late 1920s. In the 40s, he moved to this location, added chicken and waffles to the seafood menu, and the place became a local legend. We would come back here at the end of the day to eat, and we can confirm its reputation is well deserved. Tad's is one of the last remaining roadhouses, which dates back to the heyday of the Columbia River Highway. No trip along the Columbia River Highway is complete without a stop at Vista House. First opened in 1918, Vista House has served as an observatory and rest stop for travelers for more than 100 years. At the time, many criticized it as nothing more than a $100,000 outhouse, but today it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The building underwent extensive renovations between 2000 and 2005, which restored the interior to its 1916 appearance while also making the building fully ADA accessible. Vista House is built upon a rocky promontory known as Crown Point. Crown Point stands 223 meters above the Columbia River, so we should be getting some great views from up here. It was Samuel Lancaster, the consulting engineer on the original Columbia River Highway project, who proposed an observatory from which the view both up and down the Columbia could be viewed in silent communion with the infinite. You know, I have run the interstate up and down the Columbia River Gorge multiple times over the last 2 decades, and I always thought it was beautiful from down there, but it is nothing compared to the views that you get from up here on the Columbia River Highway. So glad we're finally taking the time to explore this historic road, which I have never done prior to this trip. Just like those visitors from 100 years ago, we stopped in, used the restroom, took in the view, and unlike those visitors from back then, bought a few more souvenirs for the road. Alright, that's going to do it from Vista House. We're going to pick up the road here again and continue our trip to the east. The Columbia River Gorge is famous for its waterfalls, and these are our first on this trip, the Latourell Falls in Guy W. Talbot State Park. Guy W. Talbot was a fairly rich guy from Portland, and his family had an estate in this area, and these falls were originally on his property. And in 1929, he donated the land 220 acres worth to the state of Oregon, and that is the genesis of the park which we're enjoying right now. The Latourell Creek Bridge, spanning 310 feet, built in 1914. At the time of its construction, it was one of the lightest concrete bridges relative to its dimensions in the entire country. Now, I know mankind has been building bridges for thousands and thousands of years, but to think they constructed that using technology that's over 100 years old is incredible.
Sure is. And it's gorgeous.
We have moved slightly east down the highway to our next waterfall. This is Bridal Falls. Now, the legend behind the name is that a passenger was traveling down the Columbia River on a sternwheeler and saw the waterfall up on the side of the valley and thought that it looked like a delicate, misty bride's veil. And that is the legend of where the name Bridal Falls comes from.
Up there, the highway?
Yes. So yeah, from here you can get a good view of where the highway crosses over the falls. I will always wonder what it is about human beings that attracts us to falling water and why it's such a thing for people, but every one of them is slightly different, slightly unique, beautiful in their own ways. Bridal Falls. Yeah, this definitely goes on the list of places that could have used a bigger parking lot, but I guess the nature of it being an older attraction, you ain't gonna make that happen. This is Multnomah Falls. Now, without a doubt, this is the most crowded attraction we've come across here on the Columbia River Highway, but it's easy to see why. This is the tallest waterfall in the state of Oregon. The lower falls are 21 meters. That upper fall that you see is 165 meters. There's about a 3-meter drop between the bottom and the top falls. So the overall height is 189 meters or 620 feet. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Benson Bridge. Named for Simon Benson, one of the constructors of the Columbia River Highway, it has been in place since 1914 and is considered one of the most photographed pieces of architecture in the entire state of Oregon. Now, we're not going to have time to go all the way to follow the path to the top of the falls, but you know we got to check out that bridge. The pool at the base of the upper falls used to be a very popular swimming hole, but on September the 4th, 1995, a chunk of rock the size of a bus fell 150 feet down the cliff face into the pool of water and injured 20 people, including 13 who required hospitalization. A wedding party was taking photos on the Benson Bridge at the time, and several of them were also amongst the injured.
It is estimated that 2 million people a year visit the falls, and it's easy to see why. Unlike the other attractions we've seen so far on the Columbia River Highway, this one has easy access off the interstate. Now, I've been so focused on the waterfall, I haven't even talked about the Multnomah Falls Lodge, which opened in 1925. Up until the mid part of the 20th century, it provided food and lodging. Today, it's mostly just food and the interpretive center. Oh, I love old photos of tourist spots. One last look at the falls and the lodge. Let's get back on the road because there's still a lot more to see. We've made it to the Oneonta Tunnel, which in 1948 was dynamited, closed, and filled with rubble. And of course the train comes by now, which is kind of cool to see it that close, but doesn't make for the best filming. So anywho, the tunnel was unearthed and reopened in 2009. Of course, thanks to the fires that occurred in this area a couple years ago, there's a lot of danger from rock slides and things, so they have closed it. So we are not able to actually go and get a closer look at it. But that is the original Oneonta Tunnel that was sealed up for about 55 years before being reopened. So the tunnel is original to the construction of the roadway back in 1914 through 1916. By the 40s, it was no longer an adequate size to accommodate large vehicles and trucks and things, so that's when they moved the road slightly to the north and then closed the tunnel off. And then, as I mentioned, as the train was passing, just in case you couldn't hear it, it was basically sealed up in 1948 and filled with rubble, and then excavated and reopened in 2009, but is again closed due to the risk of falling rocks and things, because all the trees and brush above it were burned in the forest fires of a couple years ago. So we leave one of the engineering wonders of the road and instead come to one of the natural wonders, Horsetail Falls, at a height of 54 meters, located right alongside the highway. This is a great spot where you can see many of the signature items from the historic highway. You've got the stone guardrails here, leading out onto a concrete bridge, and it also has the white wooden guardrails which have been so lovingly preserved and or replaced by the Oregon Department of Transportation. But there's kind of three big elements right there, all in one spot here at Horsetail Falls. Good morning to you. It's the second day of exploring the historic Columbia River Highway and the Columbia River Gorge. Yesterday we covered a large section of the highway that remains drivable. Today we kind of came back to a section that we missed a little bit yesterday, which is the Bridal Post Office, deemed to be the oldest post office in Oregon, and is subject to a large volume of mail because of the number of wedding invitations that get sent from here in Bridal. Apparently it has a unique postmark. Post office isn't open yet this morning, so we're not going to get a chance to go inside, but we had to stop and take a look. Another quick roadside stop here, this one at this old water fountain, which is the remnant of a rest area that used to be here along the historic Columbia River Highway. Of course, in those days they didn't call it the historic Columbia River Highway, it was just the Columbia River Highway. Just, you know, an aside. just like countless generations before. Another stop along the highway, the Columbia Gorge Hotel, built in 1904. Quite the view from the hotel, looking out at the Columbia River. If we look closely out there, you can see there's some windsurfing going on. A lot of whitecaps on the river today. It's pretty windy. So I misread the guidebook. This hotel was built in 1921 on the site of a hotel that had been built in 1904. This hotel was built by Simon Benson, the same guy we saw who played a factor in the development of the Benson Bridge at Multnomah Falls. Greetings from a very windy and sunny Rowena Point. Highway 30 has continued here to the east. You can really tell the terrain behind us has also changed from the mountains and the cliffs and the waterfalls to much more desert-like terrain up here. One thing that hasn't changed is the amazing amount of engineering that went into the road. And if you look down over the edge here, you can see the road below us that's going to be twisting and turning. And check out that path right there. People actually walk along there? That's insane. When you look down and see a road with all those hairpin turns and curves, it means one thing: let's drive it. Little fireside chat to wrap up this series of videos here. Viewpoint State Park along historic Columbia River Highway number 30. Great time. We took a couple days and explored the highway all the way from Troutdale through to
Dodson? No, that was the first one. The Dalles.
Yeah, the Dalles. And yeah, it's a great road. I mean, it's a piece of road engineering unlike anything that is built today, where, you know, it was built to minimize the impact to nature, built to maximize the views. It was not about getting from point A to point B. It was about having fun along the way, and we certainly, I think, had a lot of fun along the way on this trip.
We sure did.
All right, so that's it. I haven't even started editing yet, so I can't even remember all the videos that were a part of this series, but hopefully you've been following along right from the Miracle of America Museum way back in Montana, right through to all the different lighthouses, through this series, the museums, the Spruce Goose. It's been a heck of a ride. I am not looking forward to going back to my day job, just for the record.
No.
But so from the fireside chat in Viewpoint State Park, you can barely see the sun setting there through the trees and the campfires going. We're going to call that a wrap.
An awesome